Greetings, good people. This is your host, Kyle. Before we get started with this episode, I want to just mention that this episode features a guest who is a teacher and a world traveler, which is a way of saying that there will be some profanity in this episode. I know I normally keep them clean, but this episode will have some profanity and some adult themes, so just be mindful of that if you happen to be listening within the earshot of children or anybody who might be sensitive to this kind of content. Also, my guest was recorded via Zoom, so the audio quality on his end is not as high as my normal standard, but I hope you bear with the quality issues there. All right, y'all. Appreciate you listening and enjoy the show. Greetings, good people. Welcome to Who Knows It's Just Life, the podcast. I'm your host, Kyle. Appreciate you fitting me into your day today. On today's episode, I have a very special guest. This person is a big fan of the show, but he's really been a big fan and a big supporter of me my whole life. And this is my Uncle Shawn. He's my dad's youngest sibling. And so, Uncle Shawn, welcome to the show. I'd like to say hello and introduce yourself a little bit more. And if you don't mind sharing how you identify.
Oh, wow, that's a mouthful. Yes, I'm Uncle Shawn. And I don't even know how to say it. I guess I'm cis male. I don't even know what the terms are. I'm a black male. Not that I blackmail anyone, but I'm a black person who happens to be male. Oh my gosh. And I'm a teacher and a lifelong learner. And I have been traveling as a teacher for well over 20 years now. And that's basically me in a nutshell.
Cool. I appreciate it. And yeah, so I mean, just a little background. I mean, like as you mentioned, you've been traveling for decades, and one of the things that I admire about you is that you got friends and family or just, folks everywhere in the world, which is so cool and impressive. I remember I think it was the last time you were staying with me. I think it was on the day you were leaving, you had like your 2 or 3 backpacks in the living room, and
Yeah.
with the kiddo, it was like, hey kid, like everything Uncle Shawn owns is like in these backpacks. And he was like, wait, what? I'm like, how does that work? And you were like, well, when you have friends and family everywhere in the world, like you always got a place to stay. And I just, that's just a beautiful notion and a beautiful like culmination of all the travels and all the relationships you've built over the years.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I remember he asked me, he goes, well, where's your home?
Right.
And I'm like, that's it over there. You see those 3 bags? That's my home. And I said, your dad's house is my home, and your I don't know, your grandma's house is my home, and then there's 17 other homes all over the world and counting. So yeah, I'm very blessed in many ways, and to be able to connect and I think even more importantly, reconnect when you haven't seen somebody for 3 years or 8 months or, sometimes 10 years, 12 years go by. And I've been able to find a way, or my friends and I have been able to find the ways to just sort of fall right back into wherever we left off. And I don't know how that happens. It just does. And actually, a really good friend, Emmett Dunbar in Vermont. He's an organic farmer. He doesn't want to be called an organic farmer anymore because that word has been bastardized about 15 years ago. But he's a farmer up in Vermont, and he texted me on WhatsApp a while back. He goes, Shawn, the reason why it is because, you make the effort and you are out there, giving, and not to pat myself on the back or anything, but it's a matter of I don't expect things from people. I try to promote the best in them, and I try to give them the best of who I am. And it's like what all these self-help books say, it just comes back tenfold. It comes back 100-fold. And I didn't plan that. It's just, it's the golden rule. It's just the way, if we're all trying to do our best for others, then it's just a better place to be. It's a better way to be. And I'm I'm just blessed. I'm blessed.
Yeah, no, I would second that because I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but I was probably in middle school and you were the one that signed me up for email for the very first time in my life with Yahoo. That's how long ago that was. And it's because you were traveling and you were like, hey, look, this is how we can be in touch. Like, you can email me. I can write letters on here, like through email, whatever. But that is true. You've always been trying to look for ways to connect, being the one that's everywhere else or like in the randomest places. You've always put the effort into trying to connect people with your blogs, your writing, capturing video, capturing all kinds of stuff, which we'll get into later. I want to get into like how you're trying to document and capture things and kind of put it out there a little bit more a little later in the show. But yeah, no, I just give you credit for being that person that's trying to glue things together, including those relationships across time zones and continents and all that. Because you definitely did that for me. That was my first email address, and it's because of you. So, and I'll also give you credit for many, many other things, which that list is long. But just as a kid, I remember you always happened to come through and visit, like in the summertime, when around my sister's birthday. It tended to be in that time frame. And I remember I just have memories of us going. We would walk down to the tennis courts in the neighborhood, and we would wear our swim trunks too, so that we would play tennis for like an hour or 15 minutes, depending on how hot it was. And then we'd go to the pool and then we'd go back and play some more tennis and just kind of do that and spend summer days like just doing that. And I remember going to Georgia Avenue Day in DC with you, and like I don't know, you just generally approach life as just like as an experience, and you live it up to the most, like in every step. And I admire that as well.
Well, thank you. I'm getting goosebumps right now because it does remind me of a lot of my favorite moments have been when I've landed back, say, in Miami, and I've taken a 24-hour bus to get up to Maryland, because that was always my first stop coming back into the country, or New York City, where I had my Ecuadorian friends that aren't living there anymore. But so yeah, it's always been special where I remember, and this is something I always tried to do. I remember when you were just a baby and Troy was a kid, and definitely when Kendra was small, your mom or dad took a picture of me reading to you guys all. And I've gotten pictures of me reading to like the youngest toddler, the baby, and creating short stories. When Kendra came up with that amazing story, there was two creatures in the forest that became friends, and they're on a search for something, and it was just coming out, and that was a great story. And just to be a witness to that, and other nieces and nephews watching them take their first step. I think I was there when Kendra took her first step, and your mom always said, and she didn't always say it, but she said to me at one point, she said, "You know what, Shawn? People are always talking about quality time." And I think this is why I make a point to come back and try to visit people. Because she was just like, you can't have quality time until you have quantity time. So if people are not spending the time with their loved ones or with their children or with their whomever, it's impossible, or it's much more difficult to have those quality moments, So you have to put in the time to be present and to be there, even if I'm thousands of miles away. And like, I talk to you on the phone almost, once every 2 or 3 months, and we make a point that Avery's involved in the conversation, and we have, he can see where I'm at. And then you guys went out and got samosas the next day because I was chomping on some delicious samosas in Kenya a couple weeks back. But yeah, and it really hurt my feelings too. I remember we were back, all of us, all the Carsons are back, maybe for your grandma's funeral, perhaps. And that was like almost 30 years ago now. And someone asked you guys, you boys were kids, and they asked, who's your favorite uncle? And you were like, oh, Uncle Magic. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? I'm the one who comes back all the time and brings you guys hats from Ecuador and brings you guys stuff from wherever I'm traveling.
That's
why is he your favorite uncle? And you were like, well, because he's so funny. And I'm like, yes, Magic is really funny, but you haven't seen him in 15 years. You were born.
That's really
but
funny.
Yeah.
That's really funny that you remember that. I think it had to just be because he's in he's your brother, and in any given moment he's just an absolute nut. But I think in the years since then you've done a great job of being funny, and I think you're coming up. I think you're coming up on magic. I think you're close to the favorite now. I don't know.
Well, you're vying for the fifth and sixth spot of favorite nephew, so you're moving up to fifth with all the you're moving into fifth place.
Appreciate it.
Um,
Appreciate it. Well, let's actually dial back the clock. I know the episode I did with Dad and my mom. I kind of we kind of got into their, coming of age, grade school stuff. So, is there anything about your early life that you remember that sticks with you to this point in life? Is there anything you kind of want to speak about, just to share about your life journey?
there's several childhood memories, and they come from teachers and they come from neighborhood. I guess the whole point being is growing up and being developed and well-rounded. It comes from the sense of the community raising me. It's not just my mom and dad who had their ups and downs like all parents. I think they were very, very good parents. But the fact that we had, Hattie and Frankie Brown across the street, a mother and daughter. Daughter was divorced, and the mother's husband had passed away. We had these two older Black women next door that were just vital in my life and my sister. My mom had no idea how to handle a daughter, having 6 boys, and then Michelle was a year older than I am. So Michelle would go over there to get her hair done because these other Black women could do the hot comb and comb her hair, and without her, screaming bloody murder and losing patches of hair. My mom had no idea how to handle a girl. But then there's also the Yateses down the street. There was another Black family that they were very affluent. They had 5 or 6 kids as well, but he was not the painter. The painter was Mr. Coriander, who's another Black family that lived on our street, but then he moved to this big, huge house a couple blocks away. Having these kind of role models that were Black, number one, and the proximity so close by where you couldn't do anything wrong 5 blocks away because if anyone heard about it, your ass is grass, kind of. Yep. You get by the person who was, that saw you step out of line, and then when Hattie Brown heard about it, she had a wooden spoon, and then you'd tell mom, and mom would give you a crack, and then dad would come home, and so it was just like you just did not mess up as a young one, because it just wasn't worth it, number one, or you learned to be really, really sneaky. Then there was the parsonages down the street. They were all much older than I was, but they were really good friends with my older brothers. And the Quinns, for sure, lived in Saxon Green. But there was, and I can never remember his name anymore, but another man I delivered papers to over on Sylvan Street. I remember he came out one time and was giving me a tip for delivering the papers or whatever, bringing his trash cans back in or something. And he just said to me, I was 10 because it was my first paper up. He said, Shawn, practice your alphabet every day. And he's like, practice your numbers, just write them out and practice your numbers and your alphabet. And, and I think he was also the one that said, practice your vocabulary, you go through the dictionary. That's kind of how I became a teacher, because I fell in love with the English language, partly because of him, because I was like, I would practice my writing every day. And I would, your granddad was great, where he would buy encyclopedias every time the salesman came by. And so we had about 6 sets of Encyclopedia Britannica and whomever else was making encyclopedias back then. Wow. On our shelves. Right. And so the newest ones had color photos and they had, glossy pages. I fell in love with travel through the encyclopedias. I would just randomly open up anywhere and start reading about stuff that seemed interesting, whether it be some rare bird or, New Zealand. When I was 10 years old again in Mr. Diamantes' class, he gave us an assignment to write a socio-political economic report on any country in the world. And I knew everyone else was picking like France, and I loved Greece. I wanted to learn more about Greece, but I knew everyone else was picking all the normal places. And I saw this splotch of land underneath Australia, and I pointed at it and I said, "Hey, is that a country?" And he said, "Yes." And I'm like, "I'm doing New Zealand," and I fell in love with New Zealand from 10 years of age. And he was the first male teacher I had at 10 years old, and he was just phenomenal. He's still alive, and friends actually have told me they've gone back and smoked joints with him, which is like, damn, I didn't know he was that kind of teacher. He was fucking rocking. But had some of the best elementary school teachers in the world. That's another reason why I fell in love with teaching and travel and reading and the English language because of phenomenal teachers like Miss Lewis in third grade. We gave her so much grief. Myself and Gunter Kern, we were just after school for entire months. She was just like, Shawn, Gunter, all of March after school. You know, we were just always messing up in school. So we had a great time.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess you already kind of mentioned a lot of those key seeds that were planted that got you to be an English teacher, and got you to be an avid reader, writer, all of those things, and the travel bug too. So can you kind of briefly synopsize the travel journey that you've embarked on? I know you mentioned being in New York for 10 years. I believe that it's still true that that's the longest you've been in any one particular place other than growing up as a kid. But I guess on either side of being in New York for those 10 years, you know, where are some of the countries you've lived in? What was some of the work you were doing? And because what I know to be true is that you've lived on every single continent on the planet other than Antarctica, of course. So I just want to get a brief recap of how that all took place.
My travel journey started when I was, again, 10 years old in Mr. G's class and reading, Agatha Christie and Sherlock Holmes and doing research papers on New Zealand. And I fell in love with New Zealand. And back then I had this goal of like, I want to go to New Zealand for 2 weeks, because that was the thing. The American dream is to work for 11 and a half months and then travel, vacation for 2 weeks. And as I got older, I was just like, well, that doesn't make any sense, because I started meeting Europeans and they were just taking time off, a month off, 2 months, 3 months off of work, and then going back to their same job because that's how the world should work. But through reading, I got into travel. Through reading National Geographic, I was about the same age, 10, when I started really reading National Geographic, and I would get frustrated. I would, like everyone else, so for the kids out there listening, National Geographic, before it was a television show or a channel, it was just a magazine. Again, glossy pages, really about 120 pages of just the most amazing photography, just like the show is now, and the most amazing, Richard Attenborough kind of writers. And I would, of course, look through the entire magazine of all the photos because that's what caught me first. And then I'd go back to the places, the most dramatic places that I saw, or the places I thought I might want to visit, such as Angkor Wat or Machu Picchu or the Great Wall of China, whatever. And of course, the bare-breasted women of African tribes. I was just like, you're always attracted to this stuff that is so exotic. It's so exotic. All these women with their titties hanging out. And it's like, wow, that's so exotic and raw and real. And why is that like that? And why are we so uptight here? So I would start reading these articles and I'd get into 3 pages out of like a 15-page article. And I would just get so frustrated. Like, you are telling me every minute detail about the trek to Machu Picchu or about discovering Angkor Wat or the tribes of the Serengeti or whatever. And I was like, I want to find out for myself. I got the seed planted in me now with the photos and with the 3 pages that I read, but I don't want to know everything. I want to explore it for myself. I want to experience it for myself as if, like a child, when they look at a dead leaf for the first time and they stare at that for half an hour and they can play with that or look at it and investigate on their own. And that's kind of the wonder that I've had or tried to have with traveling. So I had the dream of traveling from like reading Agatha Christie books and like Death on the Nile. I want to go to Egypt and ride down the Nile. And so they inspired me to travel. And like you said, those 10 years in New York were strategic because I realized after not having any degree that I could still teach in Ecuador. So my first real journey was 26 years old, about a year after your grandma died. While she was dying, actually, I made a plan to get out of the United States because um, I realized she had lived her whole life for us. And your granddad and her had, like many in that generation, like your mom mentioned in your interview with her, and your dad as well, generations before just didn't do as much, and they didn't even go after as many dreams. When my mom was passing away, when she was ill with cancer, those last 6 months, I was definitely on a plan of, all right, my mom is one of the anchors keeping me in this country. So when she goes, I'm definitely jetting. I'm planning to go somewhere. And so from August 91 until June of 92, I was homeless by choice. I chose to save money, pay off all my debts, and get the hell out of the country without owing anybody anything. And so that was my plan, and that's what I did. I was still going to school at El Camino Community College, and so that's where I met Enrique Levine, and that's when I started having the idea. And that's when I also met these wonderful people from the kibbutz from Israel. And so I was like, I'm going to Israel. I can live on a kibbutz. I can save money. And my goal was to get into Northern Africa. Enrique, who's from Ecuador, kept pumping up Ecuador, how I could revolutionize the people of Ecuador with teaching, even without a degree. So that's how it started. And then when I realized Ecuador was a more viable option, I shifted and I packed everything up and I went to Ecuador.
So Ecuador was in 92, or was that 93 by the time you actually made the move?
93. It was 93.
93. And you were, because I remember you being in Ecuador for it felt like years. How long were you there for?
I was there 4 years.
Okay.
And then teaching those 4 years. And then I taught at one private school, which was, I call it Colegio de Ladrones, or it was Pacifico. The name of it was Pacifico. It doesn't exist anymore, but Ladrones, I don't know if you know what it means, but it means thieves. So it was just like the school of thieves. Anyway, I worked at that school for 2 years, and then during that second year, I was kind of part-time there, and I'd get on my bike and go to another school called Henri Becquerel, Institute Henri Becquerel, which is even richer kids went there, and I taught there for 2 years. And that's where I met Marina, whom I almost married. The only woman I've ever really been in love with is from Russia, and she was working there after me. She came there after me, and we fell in love and were engaged. And then that kind of all blew up a couple years later. So I was in Ecuador for 4 years teaching, and then I moved basically just on the road again because I became a tour leader for Gap Adventures. Nothing to do with the clothing store. It stands for, a Toronto company stands for Great Adventure People Adventures. I don't know why they have adventures in it twice, but it's Gap Adventures. And they were, back in the day, in the late 90s, they were like one of the top companies to go to if you were either we had a lot of newlyweds, we had a lot of single women, because South America is one of these question mark unknowns, because as people of color there, it must be a dangerous place to go, especially if you're a single white female. So right. Most right, it's like, oh, they're dark skinned, we know nothing about them, and we can't open up an encyclopedia. Back then there's no internet, so you couldn't really get a whole lot of information. But so this one Korean Canadian dude, Bruce, he was brilliant. He started this company because he had gone to South America, I'm going to say in the late 80s, and he realized all these women that wanted to go but were terrified of going by themselves. So he opened this company, and most of my clients were single women from all over the world, but Europeans are a little less fearful of people of color. So we'd get, people, a lot of Kiwis, a lot of New Zealand, Aussies, and a lot of Germans, a lot of Dutch. People that are normally world travelers. And then we had a bunch of Americans that would go, but they would always be usually either, couples or 2 or 3 women going together that were friends, that wanted to do a vacation together. And I became a tour leader there with them for about a year and a half. So, so after Marina and I sort of imploded in our relationship, it's 96, 97, and I got a job with Gap Adventures at just the right time in January of 97, and I worked for them until May of 99. Having that kind of a job where it wasn't teaching anymore, it was traveling, you know, and they're paying you. This sounds like a lot, like nothing, but they paid me $35 a day to travel and basically be on vacation for almost 2 years. So you can save an awful lot of money that way. I'm not paying for any food or drinks. All my food and drinks are free. They paid for my accommodations in hotels and anywhere I stayed, even when I wasn't working. They gave me a stipend for whatever it was, $30 a day to stay. And when you're talking about Bolivia and Peru and Colombia and Ecuador, you're talking $30 a day is more than enough to. And I was actually sending money back to your Auntie Michelle to put into a bank account so that I could actually have some money in American dollars stashed away. Well, a lot of people use that as a stepping stone to seeing the world and saving tons of money and traveling for free, which was always one of my goals.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you're weaving that in because I was curious. I was gonna ask like how you made it work financially because I think that's everybody's biggest hang up around travel is like, well, how do you afford it and da 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 da. But you're touching on that as we go, so that's great.
I also kill people every once in a while. Every time I sort of cash, someone's always got to be gotten. So I just get somebody, and then you got $10,000 right there. I'm kidding. My students would be like, what?
Yeah, no. But so what was Gap's full territory, or how much area did you cover while working with them?
So Gap only did the continent at the time, only did the continent of South America. So they had a full 120-day full tour thing where you could either start in Rio de Janeiro and go around the tip of Australia, the tip of Argentina, doing Iguazu Falls, come up through Chile and then Bolivia. And then very often I would pick them up in Bolivia for 35 days and go from Bolivia into Peru, where we spent most of our time doing the Machu Picchu trek, which I've hiked 14 times with my packs, 7 times completely, and then 7 times not completely, because my job was to take the broke bastards down if I twisted my ankle. I'd bring them down, and then we'd meet them at the last day at Machu Picchu, or the day before the last day, which was always my favorite area. The second to the last day before you get to Machu Picchu, there's a place called Wiña Wiña, which means forever young. And I just had the first time I went there, I had the most memorable time because it had rained the entire 4 days of the trek, except for that, 2.5 days. We get to Wiña Wiña at about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and finally the friggin' rain stops. And the clouds open up, and you see rainbows on one side. You see the rays of sun coming in here. There's a helicopter flying by over here, and then there's a little waterfall in the bush, and you could hear the macaws. And it was just the most. It's a terrace. It's a terrace monument. But that's my favorite site in going to Machu Picchu. The last part was 23 days from Quito to La Paz, not La Paz, to what's the capital of Venezuela?
Oh, Venice.
Caracas.
Caracas, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Caracas. Yeah, so if people signed up, not many people did, but if people could have 120 days off or 108 days or whatever, they would either start in Caracas and end in Rio de Janeiro, or they'd start in Rio de Janeiro and end in Caracas. So and then he opened up in Central America as well. So he actually, the woman who trained me, Karen, she was Mexican American, and so she went to open up part of Mexico for Gap Adventures back in 90, when I got hired, 97.
Was there another big move between that and moving into New York?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I was in Australia
for that was before that too, yeah.
Yeah, so I, to make a little bit more money, I came back, so 6 years in South America, 4 years teaching, and 2 years as a tour guide or tour leader. And so this is now, 99. So right before my boy Sasha was getting married. He was my last roommate in Quito, and he's my best roommate. He was like only 18 when he was my roommate, and I was like 28 or whatever. He was the most mature, the most respectful roommate ever. And then he invited me to his wedding in Sydney, Australia. So I went to New Zealand for the first time right before the Summer Olympics of 2000 in Australia, and that was 5 weeks of heaven. It's cold at that time in June and July, but I had a great time. It was that's where I learned you make plans to travel, but you have them very loose. You know, of course, I had 5 weeks, so I have more leeway than most people. But I landed in Christchurch, and I'm at a hostel, and I see this baked potato and soup place down the street. I go there, and I asked the guy, this big old guy serving me the soup and the baked potato, and I said, hey, if I only had 3 days here in this South Island of New Zealand, what would you recommend me do? He goes, Dunedin. I'd never even heard of Dunedin, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to Dunedin. and it was very serendipitous, and it was very spontaneous, and it was the best move I ever made, because I go down there and there's this huge castle, one of the oldest castles in New Zealand, and it's a Scottish castle, and there's a university nearby. But that's where I met Margie and her son Dion from Holland, and I had just a great time with this woman who asked her son, who was 10 at the time, asked her son, where do you want to go for summer break? And, you know, for 6 weeks or 3 weeks, they would go wherever he wanted to go. He picked 2 places, and, you know, 3 weeks, they'd go where she wanted to go. So she was a single mom taking her 10-year-old son anywhere that he wanted to go. She was also a teacher in Holland, so she had like 3 months off as well. It was just like, I love this woman. She was just so amazing. And I just want to throw in, when I go places, it's usually like a recon. I do a reconnaissance, because I was like, I read about this place when I was 10. Now I'm 33 or 36, whatever I was. I'm like, I can't expect it to be the same. It's probably gotten worse. But when I went down there in 2000, I'm like, holy shit, it's even better than what I read about, 25 years ago. So I definitely knew I wanted to go back there.
That's awesome.
And that's what my plan was. My plan was to go to New York, get my degree, and then go back to New Zealand to live for 6 to 10 years.
Right. Yeah, that was the plan. But, you wound up staying in New York for 10 years. And I know there were a couple of reasons for that. One of which was, I know there was a woman you were dating at the time. You were pursuing your degrees, stuff like that.
She was like, she's also a teacher. She was like, Shawn, you've got your BA. You might as well hang on and get your master's, because then you'll be more valuable when you go out there. You can command more. And she was 100% right. And I loved teaching in New York. And so we went we're still really good friends, but we went our separate ways. So yeah, I got my master's, and so this was 3 or 4 years after myself and my friend were together. I was making the plan again to get the hell out of Dodge, because, like you said, 10 years was like a long stretch. But I also was thinking at it strategically. I'm like, well, if I've been teaching, so before I got my degrees, I was teaching at a Catholic school in Flushing, Queens, right down the street from where my university was, and the university I was going to, Queens College, was about a quarter of a mile away. So I wouldn't even drive because it was horrendous parking. So yeah, that's where I finished my BA, because I started in UR High, where your dad went and where your mom went and where everyone else in Rhode Island seemed to go. I started at UR High, and then I went to California and went to El Camino Community College, which is now a university. And I finally ended 25 years after starting at Queens College in Flushing, a really, really phenomenal, underrated school. And I highly recommend, anyone listening, you can get a great education without going to the place with the top dollar or the prestige, or, people go to Harvard because of the connections and whatever. But I'm a poor black that dude telling you, I got a lot of connections, and I gotten to where I wanted to get to without, the Harvard degree or without. And I've been, as much as I'm an educator, I've been anti higher education most of my life. And we can go into the systemic racism that goes with the public schools and schools in general in the United States. And we can go into, the business end of higher education, which I detest. I do believe everyone has the right and the privilege to get educated any way they see fit, whether it's painting or as a performance artist or whatever. But I don't think they should be bankrupt to do it,
Oh, for sure. Definitely. And I know I graduated with a lot of debt, and I know that's very, very common for those in my generation.
With that being said, I loved Queens College. It was a cheaper school. It was right around the street from where I was working at the Catholic school, teaching some amazing kids at St. Anne's Middle School. So I taught kids from kindergarten up to 8th grade, and that's what helped me to, again. Well, I wasn't making at the parochial school. They were paying me pennies, but I was happy because it was still more than waiting tables, and it was something that I was passionate about doing, and I was learning my craft a little bit more there. So I started teaching 4 years in Ecuador, and then part of tour leading is being a teacher as well, because I have to show people places and things and help them travel more safely. And sometimes order their scrambled eggs every single day because they've been traveling for 100 days in South America and still don't know how to speak Spanish, which is just slappable.
That says a lot.
Yeah, she was a special case, and I don't want to talk about her because we almost died in Colombia together, and it's all because of her. Well, not all because of her. It's because of.
I mean, your survival was because of her, or the reason you were in the predicament was because of her?
The reason we were in the predicament was because of her. Everyone else had canceled. We usually don't take, we call them packs or passengers. We never took more than 12 on any trip unless it was a special organized thing. And we never took fewer than 4. There were only 3 people that were going to go on from Quito to Caracas, Venezuela. And she was one of the few that had started in Rio. And so she's like, I want to finish the full thing and my flight from Caracas. My company was willing to give them, in lieu of going those 23 days to Caracas, they were going to give them like a 5 or 7 day trip to the Galapagos. They were going to give them all this other stuff, and they were going to get them, change of flights from Quito or even from Colombia out to wherever they're going to. And she's the only one that said, no, I want to fly out from Caracas. And so we crossed the border from Ecuador into Colombia, and we're held up by the biggest motherfucking gun I've ever seen in my life, pointed at us, because there was Miguel, the driver. There was, I'll just call her Rachel. No, I'll call her Karen. Karen was in the middle from England, and there was me. So the guy, he was only like a 15-year-old boy or a 12-year-old boy. He had a friggin' 45, and he just kept pointing it first at the driver, Miguel, then at Karen, and then at me, and then back to Karen, and then back to Miguel, the driver. And I was like, gun it, Miguel, kill him. But he didn't. Fortunately, he stopped. And it's a good thing he did, because there was another kid with a gun down like the side of so to the left was the cliff going down about 15 to 2,000 meters, just a straight drop down. So if that kid had shot Miguel, we might have all swerved off the road and all died.
Wow.
So it's a good thing he stopped and didn't kill this 14-year-old kid that was stealing from us. So and a third kid gets on the bus, the minivan that we were on, and then we drive up into the hills, and then they rob us there. And then, so the whole way up the hill, the third kid had a machete to the back of Karen's neck, and we're going over this bumpy road, and I didn't know they had a knife to her neck. I didn't know at all. And afterwards, she's like, I think my neck is bleeding. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And she's like, no, the guy had a knife to the back of my neck the whole way up. And I'm like, holy shit. All right.
Was it bleeding?
But
did that, like, for real?
I don't know. And I don't care. I was just like, I shouldn't be here. This is I thought we were all going to get killed. I thought they were going to rape the women and kill the men and then take off with the van. I was just like so happy that all they did was take our money. I realized they were kids as they were robbing us. Kieran, in her little fanny pack, she had, you know how you have those braided bracelets.
Mm-hmm.
She had about 20 of those as trinkets to give friends or whatever. And the kid that looked in her fanny pack, and fortunately, she had dark hair, dark eyes, and a really nice tan. Even though she was British, she looked like she could be Latina. And I was just like, just don't open your mouth. You don't know any Spanish, and so don't say anything. And also, her passport, being from England, is the same color as the Colombian passport. It's like a maroon color back then. So they might have just thought and these kids weren't that savvy anyhow. This kid looks in her fanny pack looking for money. He sees the bracelet and he's so enamored by the bracelets. He's just like took out like all 20 of them and he's just like, oh wow. And he's showing his friends. He's like, look at bracelet. And then he was more, taken by that than the damn money, Fortunately, I always travel. Most of my money is in my socks. So they got a little bit of money from me, but they didn't get like 95% of the cash that I had with me. That's not what I told the company. I told them I got wiped out $1,000. No, I'm kidding.
All right, hold on. Where were we?
Oh, that was digressing. Yeah, New York, 10 years, and then I made the plan to go back to New Zealand, and that's what I did. I went back to New Zealand. So I get to New Zealand in October 20th of 2011, and it's unfortunately after all these major earthquakes had happened, and they were actually letting English teachers go, so I couldn't get a visa, I couldn't get a job there. So my 10-year plans of being in that side of the world crumbled within 6 or 7 months. I tried to get a visa for 7 months, and after that, my life savings was dwindling, and I'm like, because I wasn't working under the table like I had in Australia. I was wanting to be able to get a visa without them saying, "Oh, you had a job as a waiter, and that'll renege you from getting a visa." So after 7 months, I'm in the house in San Martin in Christchurch, and like within 4 days, I do research on Singapore, China, and Thailand, and I'm just like, I landed in Thailand 4 days later and taught third graders in Thailand for a year. And then I moved to Vietnam, worked there for 2 years. And then I moved to China and worked there for 2 years.
Nice. And then that pretty much, wait, what year does that bring us to? Because then you came, that brings us to like 2016, 17, right? Because then you were in Nicaragua for not quite a year with my dad. And then that shenanigans happened.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was, I think you said that was scarier than the bus robbery, right?
Diriamba, Nicaragua was far more frightening because it was more long lasting. So I get there, I think it was December 9th, 2017. There were so many other things that the airport had stolen or wouldn't release some of the stuff, or the immigration wouldn't release some of the stuff. I'd sent your dad and the organization tons of stuff, books, materials from China that I was.
Oh yeah, I remember that, and it got like confiscated. They wouldn't let it through and whatever.
Right. So DM, whatever it is, whatever is like the FedEx of the world. They wanted they really just wanted a bribe, but they were like, you need to prove that the stuff is whatever. So they basically stole like $500 worth of stuff that they could not use because it was clothing, it was books in English that they couldn't even sell to anyone. It was just like, why are you stealing this shit? And of course, I probably had some money hidden in there as well. But it's like, just give us the stuff. And I don't think your dad ever got that box. So April 17th, I'm going to say, the 19, 20, 21-year-old kids in the universities were peacefully protesting that Daniel Ortega, their president, decided to reduce the grandparents of Nicaragua their Social Security. And so these kids were protesting peacefully, and 7 of them got killed on April 17th, I believe it was, 2018. And so schools were shut down. we, as a safety precaution, moved the 7 or 8 volunteers that are mostly from Belgium and France and Holland, moved them to a beach resort area about 2 hours away, closer to the Costa Rican border, so that if shit did hit the fan, we could just take a half-hour drive to the border and get the hell out. So unfortunately, the few of those, actually everybody in that group, all 7 of those kids were in love with somebody from the town of Diriamba, and they weren't thinking clearly. They kept wanting to stay, and I was just like, schools are closed. You guys are whiter than paper, and you are targets. You may know a little Spanish, but you stand out like white on a blackboard. So it's like, we cannot safely be here. I had been in Ecuador when there was upheaval and there were 3 presidents in one day, and that was less frightening. I've walked through protests in Ecuador where there's tear gas going off and there's Molotov cocktails being thrown at tanks in the streets. It was almost like a monthly event in Ecuador. I've been through some mudslides in Bolivia and in Ecuador where I almost lost my life a couple of times. I have never been more scared than in Diriamba, because it was like, your dad, I was like, we need to leave these kids out of here, because if we die or something bad happens to us, we've had pretty long lives and pretty good lives. So we need to watch out for them. And your dad kept wanting to have like a boat. And I'm like, no, we can't ask them what they fucking want, because they're in love with these kids in this country and they don't want to leave. And they have this altruistic, like, it'll blow over in a couple of days. So April 17th, 7 kids got killed. Nicaraguan kids got killed. And then 2 days later, Daniel Ortega reinstated the Social Security stuff. But every single day, they were burning rubber tires in the road at 7 o'clock in the morning. And so buses couldn't get by. Food couldn't get in and out of into the city. And these kids were not just protesting their grandparents losing their pension, they were protesting a predominantly Black region in the northern part of Nicaragua that had been under fire. Think of Katrina, had been under fire for about 5 or 6 days, and the government hadn't done squat to help this Black community. Now, just imagine, Black community, very culturally involved in the where tourists want to go, and their crafts, their music, their food is so eclectically different from the traditional, I forgot what it was called, the rice and beans that they eat every day in Nicaragua and the other fare. So these young protesters were not just protesting, well, they're now protesting the 7 kids that were killed, and they were protesting these fires that were out of control in the north, in the Black Fruit region, and they were protesting like 5 or 6 other things that Ortega had neglected over the last years. Ortega, just to give a historical background, was a prisoner. He was one of the good guys. He was a rebel against the rich fucks that were running Nicaragua, backed by the U.S. government from the 40s up until the 70s. They were ousted. But Daniel Ortega was put in jail for 5 or 6 years and tortured for all those years. He gets out. There's a peaceful takeover of power in the late 70s, which American government did not like, but Ortega, having no political aspirations or background, became the leader. And so like 2 years later, he says, we're gonna have elections. He got voted out and he stepped down peacefully. He came back like 8 years later, got reelected like in the late 80s and lasted for like 6 years or 8 years. And then he got voted out again. So he had been in the presidential offices since the late 70s, all the way up until he's still there now. So he'd been voted in though, like 3 or 4 times, which is just insane because every other country has this thing, you can't run for president more than twice. So this last time he's in, just think of the old oligarchies that are all over the world. He gets in and he just loses his fucking mind. And he does stuff like, I'm gonna, take pension money away from these elderly that have put money in for 40 years. And now how are they gonna live? So instead of just owning up and saying, yes, our police officers killed these kids, here's retribution, and we're going to reinstate instead of just backing down and being the man, he dug himself in, and it just got worse. So now we're all back in Didiamba, but we we go down to the courthouse, whatever, and the courthouse has been burned down the night before. We go to the market, and you could buy fruits and vegetables and stuff, but here and there might be a pocket of 20 people that are just yelling really loudly, and there's a protest happening again, and I would hightail it out of there. We were basically living under siege that last month. And again, it was just like, let's vote to see, should we leave tomorrow or should we leave next Monday? I'm just like, what is all the voting about? Let's just get the F out of here. So finally, it simmers to a boil, and the arguments finally went over more of the other passengers or the other volunteers, and it's just like, yes, let's leave tomorrow. All of us will stay in two houses. So many of them were staying at Gary's house or at one other house, and we're going to have 3 taxis come and pick us up from Gary's house, and we're going to all leave together at 3:00 in the morning to go to the Costa Rican border. And that's what we did. And so it takes about 2.5 hours to get there. We're there about an hour and a half before the border opens, knowing that we have to get there earlier because every day at 7:00, they close off the roads with burning tires and bullshit. So we get there at about 5:30, 6:00 in the morning. We wait until they open up. We cross the border. We pat them on the head and we say, thank you for your service and, have a great life. Your dad and I chill out at the beach in Costa Rica for a couple of days. And then we were planning to go to Cuba, but by the time he hit, clicked to buy the tickets, they had tripled in price or whatever. So we ended up in Mexico for about 3 weeks, kind of decompressing there. Your dad and I had a fantastic time. Like 5 days in Oaxaca, 5 days in Guadalajara, and 5 days in Puerto Vallarta. So then after that, your dad goes back to Maryland, and I went to Florida and hung out with my friends, my Ecuadorian, some of my first students ever from Ecuador in Fort Lauderdale and in Miami. So I ended up out in Hawaii again, after visiting all my friends and family in Vermont, in Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, the whole eastern seaboard. Then I came back out to Hawaii.
So you were in Hawaii when COVID hit and everything, and I know there's probably some stories there, but I do want to jump to your most recent travels. I don't mean to gloss over I know you were in Europe for a bit last year, and I don't want to gloss over that, but because I know that was amazing. I know we were in touch about some of that, but I do want to jump to, just in the interest of time, I want to jump to your experiences in Africa most recently. You started in what I say is Kemet, but Egypt. Then you were in Ethiopia and most recently Kenya. So I guess what was it like being finally, you mentioned earlier, wanting to go to Africa. You mentioned that being, a later in life type of goal. So to actually make it to Africa. And I realized you didn't get to stay as long as you wanted to. I know but what was it like after all of this travel that you've experienced on all these different continents? What was it like finally getting to Africa and being in the 3 places or in the 3 countries you visited there?
One day, I can't do the song, but yeah, it was everything and more, because I'm so glad I put it off to right now, because I do think things happen for a reason. I wanted to come here on my own terms. I wanted to come here where I didn't necessarily have to worry about working or just rush in and be in a job for a year and experience countries in that way, because I would have most likely have started off in South Africa, which is a brilliant country, but there is so much more to these 54 countries that are in this continent. And coming in through Egypt was a surprise, and a pleasant surprise. It's definitely my number one contender for where I might want to settle for 3 to 6 months of the year. I do not like their ¿cómo se dice? The civil rights violations, or the way they treat their female brethren. And I do not like how it's getting a little bit more repressive every year. But it is a most amazing country. I didn't know they had diving. I didn't know so much about the country that is just fascinating. And I again, you said I didn't visit there as long as I'd like to. It's recon for me. It's just all recon. It's definitely amazing. I crossed the border, like we talked when we were on the phone from Ethiopia, and as soon as I cross the border or land in the plane in Ethiopia, the food, of course, everyone there is darker because northern Egypt they're more lighter and they're more Muslim. Southern Egypt is darker, and you find that those tribes in Abu Simbel were the ones that kept all the other aggressors out for the longest period of time, and their culture is still very much intact. They dress differently, their food is different, and their language is different. So well, no, they have a different language than the Egyptians in the north. It's just phenomenal. But you cross the border, and the hair is the first thing you notice, and then the fact that there's so much more color as far as clothing, and they are more. I think I told you a story about one of my first nights in Addis Ababa, and there was like a domestic situation at the restaurant bar that I was at that was just disturbing because you don't see anything like that in Egypt. You don't see any real anger. I mean, I did see a group of dudes in Cairo beating down this other guy. They get into an argument or whatever, and either that guy has pissed off a bunch of other people, and they weren't even beating him down. They were like slapping him, and he never hit the ground or anything, but they're just open hand hitting him and yelling loudly, and but six guys are on one guy doing this. It's kind of disturbing, and so, but I mean, that was the only violence I had seen in Egypt. Was I think my second time back in Cairo, and it wasn't even that bad. There was no fists, there was no blood. I mean, I didn't stay long enough to watch, but it was just like it was just like more demonstrative than out to get blood like it is in other mob mentalities. The food in Egypt was amazing. Unfortunately, my stomach just cannot handle some of the spicy goodness of the duro wat and some of my favorite foods there. Kenya is my second favorite country. I love Kenya. It's one of the few countries, as I was leaving after 3 months there, that I wasn't like, I got to get the hell out of here. So yeah, I've loved my time in this part of Africa for these last 6 months. I'm definitely coming back. And it'll be a longer period, and I'll most likely hit it from the west coast next time. I'll come down through Morocco, or maybe just fly into South Africa and then work my way up through Botswana, and that way, it really, a lot of my travels just depend on who I meet, and if I'm in a hospital and someone says, you got to go here, you got to go there. Half the places I went to in Egypt are because I met this man, his name is Ozzy. He's a Caribbean American dude, kind of like some of the friends you grew up with in Maryland. He was basically educated in the States. I think he's got a degree, a law degree, but with COVID, he ended up, traveling over here, and he's doing the vlogging as well. And, that's sustaining him enough.
So one thing I want to try to wrap up in a little bit, but I do want to get, I do want you to share what it was like, share what the reception was in Africa, being a black man, a black American traveling in Africa. I realize that's probably not the norm as much as we would like it to be the norm. So I guess, can you speak on that reaction that you got?
Yeah. It's funny in the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, men would just look at me and go, "Oh, Nigeria. Oh, Senegal." And I'd be like, "Maybe, don't know."
Right.
That's kind of why. Yeah, there would just be like, I mean, it's not just my clothing, but they could tell by the way my eyes are different, my nose, my facial structures is different, and most could tell right off the bat. Some who aren't as, I guess, worldly, they didn't know. I mean, they could almost always tell by my clothing. But yeah, the reception has been pretty good. It's been well. Let me put it this way: my last Airbnb hostess, Esther, She's in a bunch of my videos on my channel. She is like kind of angry. It's like, why do all you Americans, not just so much black, but why do all you Americans always just, epitomize Nelson Mandela? And I'm like, she's like, there's been plenty of presidents that were, before they were incarcerated, they were put in jail because they were part of the rebel forces of bloody bloody blah, whatever. And I'm like, he was in jail for 26 in the third years. And, and then after we talked about it, she's like, well, yeah, I guess he's a unique situation. And I can see why the rest of the world and Americans think that he's all that, almost like royalty. But there were a lot of things that she was just generally upset with. Now, she's she's not affluent. She is now, but she came from a farming family. And in Kenya, a man is only as powerful as his wife or wives. And so they have inheritance. So every Kenyan from this certain tribe in this Kikuyu will be given land from their ancestors. So they have that kind of power and that kind of clout right off the bat. So for the most part, I've been received very well. I didn't have any problems in Egypt, and primarily that's because their government there has basically has put out a mandate that Americans are off limits because they don't want any kind of embargo against them. They don't want any kind of shit from the U.S. government hurting their country economically, politically, militarily. So they are walking on eggshells with Americans. I was told that other Europeans, white, black, whatever, they're not treated as nicely as I have been, or as other Americans might be, which is just so bizarre, coming from where we come from. It's the black man in Africa is treated better than the European. It's like, holy shit.
So I want to jump to one, maybe two last questions. What was being in Ethiopia? I know there's been conflict in the Tigray region. Like, what was it like locally? I know you weren't anywhere near that area, but just it being in the country, what was it? What was the news like coming from that area? What was the sentiment like? What were the local conversations around that conflict, if any? Like, what did you pick up from your experience there?
What you would hear in most of the international news, maybe aside from American news, it's the civil rights violations were talked about in the newspaper, and they were talked about kind of openly from the government and from the people of that area trying to regain their territory.
So I guess my last question on the topic is just, it's kind of a reflection. It's a reflection that I have when I look at you and your life. And I basically followed the same life path as my dad, who got married out of college, settled down, had kids, that kind of thing. I got divorced a bit earlier than he did, but so my life started out very similarly in just in terms of settling down and buying a home and that kind of thing. And I look at you and I'm like, wow, that's a beautiful way of living. That's a beautiful thing to be able to figure it out for your life. And I understand that you didn't. I don't know if you I feel like you maybe wanted to have kids and stuff like that. And I know those things, as you always say, plans change, as has been evident by just the travel plans themselves. But I guess reflecting on just like life goals in general and looking at me as a mid-30s person who has chosen that settled life so far, but looks a little bit enviously at, or not envy, that's the wrong term, admirably at your life and what you're doing. What would you say to me or anybody that's living my style of life in this moment based on your experiences?
As far as what, don't get married, don't have kids?
No, that's not. No, I unless that's the advice.
I told you that before you got married. I said, don't do it.
No, well, and then there's the video you posted that was like, drop out of school and do this, kids. When you were on the boat.
Oh, you saw that. Nice, you saw that. Yeah,
yeah.
My advice to you and everyone else is live your best life. What's best for you. I've told you several times that what I've done and what I'm doing is not for everybody. You're right. I did want to have kids. I did want to be more like your dad. I thought your dad and your mom had the perfect marriage and the perfect. No one does, but I thought having the two boys and a girl, and having they were living the life I always wanted to live. And even when I first went to university, I was trying to force myself into computer science, and because that was like the wave of the future. And we're talking 84 here, 1984. And I thought it's a lucrative job, but I saw myself 20 years later being 310 pounds, someone, bent over some outlet, fixing the back of some CPU and, having plumber's crack and all. That's how I saw myself, bald and just grossly overweight and making great money. But just like the way I envisioned my future being in IT was just not the way it is and not the way most IT professionals are. But that's what I saw at 17, 18 years of age. So my advice is, or my, recommendation is do you, boo boo. I mean, do the best, do the best you can do. Build a life the best way you want. I mean, I listened to your interview or your talk with Tony, and everyone is different. Everyone is different, and I constantly tell my boys, Vinny and Louis and others, others that I'm mentoring or that I've taught. It's like, this is not for everyone. It's kind of a difficult life if your mindset is for being settled down or having kids, say by 40 or whatever, 45. And that was my plan. My plan was to find somebody on my travels, and Marina was that person. My Russian girlfriend, my Russian fiance, she was that person, and then that just didn't pan out. And so for me, I refuse to settle. So it's like, people keep saying, why do you compare every other girlfriend to her? It's like, well, if she was the epitome of what I've attained in the past, then why would I go for anything else less than? And people look at that and they, speaking of Africa, the Ethiopian men, the Kenyan men, when you say you're not married, and they're like, oh, you're missing out. They're like, I was crazy, I was lost, I was out of control before I got married. Now I have a few kids, and I've got focus, I've got direction, and I'm like, okay, but it's not for everybody. To be married and have kids is not everybody's design. And I was like, well, I have 2,572 kids that I've taught that are like my kids. And this one guy in Ethiopia goes, that's bullshit. That's what all teachers say. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm sorry, but you can yell at me that I'm not living the good life because I don't have kids or I don't have this wonderful woman to go home to every night. But it's like, I have freedom in so many other ways, and I have, put it this way, if I had gotten married even 15 years ago or 20 years ago and had kids, I definitely would not have been there for certain other friends' kids' baptisms. I would not have been there for weddings or funerals or other events, because I most likely would not be living in the States. I'd be living wherever I found my wife, or wherever she found me. So it's a matter of I don't even see it as sacrifices. It's just we are of a nation that we have choices, and one of the worst afflictions that happen to developed nations is having too many choices. So we always feel like we're missing out on something. This whole thing of FOMO, the fear of missing out. It's whatever you're doing, it's like, I could have been doing it. Yeah, you could have been, but just look at yourself, take a few deep breaths and go, am I happy? And if you can say yes, much of the time, you're in a good place. And it's okay to not be okay and say, no, I'm not happy. Because then you have a choice to fucking change it. In your show, you mentioned that in every intro, like you're trying to figure things out and you may contradict 3 times in the next half hour what you thought firmly believed in. And I've listened to your episodes, and you do. Because in certain circumstances, letter A is the right answer, but in other circumstances, B is the right answer. And so it varies. It fluctuates. It's not ever one size fits all. So That would be my advice. One size does not fit all. Figure out what fits you and go after that as best you can.
And I think it's also fair to say that the fit might change based on your life. I mean, my dad did the settle down thing, and then at 50, before he actually made the move, he knew he wanted to make a move. But at 55, he retired early, and he's living the life he's living now. So yeah, it's you can always change it up at a different point.
And that's exactly it. I mean, I've lost about 20 pounds since I've started traveling in, maybe 30 pounds, 25 pounds. I've started putting some of it back on again. But I mean, you're right. So just like our waist size changes and we need to have the pants let out or just get a new friggin' pair of pants, it's the same thing. Things change. Our taste buds change every 7 years. As your Uncle Magic used to always tell me, used to say, I was about to go into the military. I was 18. This is almost 40 years ago. He said, the average person will change their jobs every 7 years. And he's been right, because as we've become more educated and communication is more accessible, we can teach ourselves how to do different things, and we evolve, we change into something different. So yeah, one size does not fit all. And right, where those sizes are going to change. They're going to go up, they're going to go down, they're going to be, and then the style, you might be into stripes for a few years, and then you might be into polka dots, and it's just, it's you do you,
Yeah. It's funny. A lot of time, I obviously live in the same area I grew up in, and some friends also have never traveled, never lived anywhere else or whatever. And when we talk about, finding partners, romantic partners and stuff like that, it's like, oh, the conversation is about, it comes up. It's like, oh, do you believe in a soulmate? And it's like, no, there's like 8 billion people on the planet. Like there's gotta be like probably 1,000 people or maybe 2,000 people that things would feel amazing with. Right. But you've traveled the world and there's still just that one soulmate that you had. So maybe we're all wrong.
No. Again, you do you, because it's a matter of, that's the only person I could have settled. I think most people in the world.
But see, that's settling. I'm not talking about settling. Our thought was that like there'd be 1,000 people or some number of people that's bigger than one, that it wouldn't feel like settling. If you would feel that same way that you felt with.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean, and I do believe there is someone else out there. I do believe I could have been very happy with a couple other women. I've always been too logical in that sense. It's just like, and that may have kept me out of some relationships. It's just like you might be able to see being with someone for 5 or 6 years, but then, and that's just me, again, doing the chess game, mapping it all out, and I could have been wrong. I could have been wrong a couple of times, but I don't think I've missed out. I don't think I may have made the wrong decision here or there, but I don't live with regrets, and I don't dwell on that. I don't say, oh, I could have, I should have. It's just like, I'm still doing positive things. I'm still working towards something bigger than I've ever done before. I feel like I'm on a path towards my next best me, and I feel like I'm getting really close. And for me, I think part of that meditative process is traveling, because I got to see what I don't want to be. I got to see what I don't want to be doing.
I feel you. And that's a beautiful perspective. And I feel like I've had that perspective myself in the last, 5 or 6 years, just every year being the best year of my life and making it just, the new version of you. I talk about like, everybody gets caught up in like, I mean, you probably don't as much as others, but like the whole New Year resolution thing. But like every day is a new day to start a new year of something or whatever, and it doesn't have to be on January 1st. It could be at any point you can course correct or change your pivot and do something differently. So I think that's the way you worded it though was very poignant, and I appreciate that.
Well, I have listened to your podcast, and I think I've gleaned a bunch from your podcast when you had the anti-resolution thing in the beginning of January, I think a year ago, and then you start your podcast with like I fell off of doing my 20 minutes a day or whatever your goal was for the fitness, the physical, the mental health, and the emotional health. I think that if you fall off for a month or you get too busy or whatever, and the fact that when you said, oh, Avery came home and he was like, "Hey, we didn't do that thing we did last night. The mindfulness. When you mentioned that in one of your podcasts and how that hit you, or maybe we were on the phone and you mentioned that, but it was just like he reminded you that Sundays was the day to do the mindfulness when you're with him, and he reminded you. So then that's what we're all here for. We're all here to keep each other checks and balances. We're all here to remind each other. I love your podcast because you talk about so many things. The political stuff I have to get ramped up for because it's heavy.
All right. The last questions, just for how I have the questions for the guests. So the first question is, what superpower would you be if you could have a superpower?
I would like to be able to eat 47 grapes all at the same time and not choke on any of the seeds. No, I don't really know what my superpower would be. I think I wish I could be in more places at the same time, at least one other place at the same time. So like be like Flash, I guess, be able to get to one place. Although that's still not being at two places at the same time. I would like to be able to split and be fully present at both places, and then be able to do that. Even if I could just do that sometimes for a half hour every once in a while, that would be a great superpower.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, cool. What's the last book you read, and do you recommend it, or just the last book that you've read recently that you do recommend?
Definitely recommend Come As You Are by Dr. Emily Nagoski. She's got the series on Netflix called The Pleasure Principle, and it's everything it sounds like. Nothing to do with Janet Jackson, but it definitely is The Pleasure Principle. Basically about women becoming more empowered with their bodies and understanding how their bodies work. Highly recommend that for all people to read, not just women. I think everyone needs to understand how they're treating the opposite sex and how missionary normal sex for most women is just not doing it for them, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. No pun intended, but it's I'm sorry. Yeah. This is not like one of our normal conversations. Usually we're laughing more, but yeah, I definitely highly recommend that. I'm halfway through The Promised Land by Obama. I can't wait for it to be free again on Libby.
Oh, nice.
But that's the books I was rocking out to.
Cool. The last question is, what song are you rocking to? I know you're sending me songs all the time. What song are you rocking to right now?
Right before you called, a song by Shatter Story called October Child. And it's from a 2006 Chill Step collection. I've been sending you guys like chill hop and lo-fi stuff that my friend Ali, she got me onto a few years ago in Hawaii. I've gotten into the chill step, and it's just awesome because it starts out chill and then it drops. And October Child by Shatter Story is fan-friggin-tastic.
Nice.
They've got two other cuts on this album that I was listening to while I was doing work today, and I got to check those out to see if they're as good as October Child. I couldn't sit still when I put it on this afternoon. I was like, oh my goodness, and I'm like just dancing around the room like a madman.
Cool. Actually, one thing I forgot to ask you in the beginning is where are we talking to you from?
Istanbul, Turkey.
All right. At the end, so you do have your vlog stuff. Your it's hilarious to me that you have social medias in the varieties that you do. So for the listeners on this show, please drop whatever YouTube channels and other things that you are posting to, so that folks can follow you and see more about your content and travels.
Yes. At Do Epic Shit 13, just the way it sounds. I tried to do my blog page as Do Epic Shit, but then it just came out as Shawn Carson, so I guess I am Epic Shit. I don't know. I think Wi-Fi dropped out when I put in a new name, and then I think Wi-Fi or the power went off or whatever, and so it just kept my name on So my vlog name is Shawn Carson. Make sure you're looking for the black one because there's about 82 Shawn Carsons that have vlogs, and mine is just Shawn Carson. It will be changed. I'm rebranding to Do Epic Shit. I can also be reached at Shawn CA 418-07069. I don't know how that came out, but I think that's a Twitter. I'm not sure. I'll text it to you. You'll be able to get that.
All right, I'll put it in the show notes. That sounds good. I appreciate you joining me on this conversation. This was a lot of fun, and I know there's so many stories that you have, and so many lessons, and just stories of hilarity and poignancy and all that over the years. So I appreciate you sharing some of those, and maybe we'll do it again some other time. Hope maybe when you're in person next time you're in town, we can do another one.
That'll probably be 2061. That's the next time I plan to be my 20, 30-year plan.
Well, as things will change, it might be in a couple years. So yeah.
No, it probably will. Yes, it probably will.
Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate it. I love you, and be safe out there. And as always, we'll be in touch. I'll try to get you on the phone with the kid again soon too.
Yeah. Let me know when you have them, and we can chat, and I'll have the videos so we can see some more great food that you guys will go out and. Oh, there's such great food here in Turkey. You have to. I'll do a video chat with you and the young one. That to me is, and even what we're doing now is so. It's what gives me energy to keep going on and to keep going. But man, I love you too. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and keep doing your podcast, because I do really enjoy just getting lost in them. And you've gotten the notes that I've sent back to you. I'm always quintessentially a teacher. I'm just like, this is what I thought about.
I love it. I do. For those listening, this uncle of mine will write notes, feedback, just thoughts, like other sources, just other stuff that to complement the episodes that he's watched, or I'm sorry, that he's listened to. So for sure, I really appreciate that. I read them all, and it's very helpful to get that feedback. So the rest of you listeners too, I welcome your feedback too. But thank you, Shawn, for providing it. All right, that's the show. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Who Knows It's Just Life, the podcast. As always, you can get at me on Instagram at RealDadult. That's RealDadult. I look forward to any feedback you have on this episode or any prior episodes. Also, if you have any ideas for any future episodes, I'm game to hear those as well. Hope to catch you here next time. Until then, be safe, be well, peace.
Life podcast is recorded, produced, and edited by me. All thoughts and views expressed on the show represent that moment in time. Participants have the right to be wrong, learn, and reshape their ideas as the journey through life continues. Please remember to like this episode if you haven't already. Subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, thank you.